Hello folks, this is Chris Blask. Debbie Windle is normally the moderator for these sessions, but she's not here today, so I'm going to be reading her script and playing both roles and so forth. So pardon me for not being nearly as eloquent as she is with these things. But as we are at top of the hour, as we always do with these briefings, we'll take a few minutes and read through some preparations and ground laying and so forth, give people a chance to join up. So with no further ado, welcome to the Industrial Control System Information Sharing and Analysis Center's monthly public briefing. We will take another minute or two to give those who are still logging in a chance to complete the process. During this time, I will provide some housekeeping notes. If you're calling in on the telephone, you will find a PIN number on the GoToWebinar application. Please enter this PIN number into your phone and press pound. This will allow us to manage background noise and unmute you. If you don't, we can't. My name is not Debbie Windle, but if it was, I would still be moderating today's session. Debbie serves as Community Director for the Center and oversees the Center's human-to-human information dissemination mechanisms. In case you are not aware of the full range of collaborative products we have to offer, make sure you check out our LinkedIn group, Twitter account, and website blog posts. Plus, we hope you'll take full advantage of these briefings, as well as our Thursday open forum discussion sessions. Our goal is to get our members accurate, timely, and actionable information in a way that best suits their needs. Today's briefing, Stronger Than Firewalls, Unidirectional Gateways in Defense-in-Depth Architectures, features Waterfall Security Solutions Director of Industrial Security, Andrew Ginter, as this month's subject matter expert, and will be hosted by ICS-ISAC Chair Chris Blask, whoever he is. During today's presentation, Chris will take the first few minutes of the call to give a brief center overview and bring up to speed on latest developments from the center. Next, Andrew will spend about 35 to 40 minutes for his presentation. Finally, there will be time for questions and answer and open discussion at the end of the presentation. I will be attempting to keep as many of you as possible off mute so you can speak your thoughts or raise questions as appropriate. But please mute your headsets or phones if necessary to help reduce unwanted background noise. When speaking, please introduce yourself and indicate your industry affiliation. Additionally, if you would like to ask a question, you may also use the hand raise feature in the GoToWebinar application. After the meeting, a recording of this session will be available on the Center's website. Slides may be available upon request and at the presenter's discretion. Please contact an ICS-ISAC staff member for further information. So now, without any further delay, Chris, over to you for your center update. Well, thank you, Chris. That was a great introduction. So as Debbie would have said if she was here, I'm going to give a quick snapshot of who the ISAC is. Many of the people who registered today and many of the people watching this may not have know who we are, since this is open to members and non-members, and talk about one topic, spend about 10 minutes on all that, and then pass it to Andrew, our guest speaker, who is going to go through his topic for the day. So the ICS-ISAC is a knowledge-sharing center. Our purpose is to enable information sharing amongst the stakeholders and parties of interest in industrial control system security. We focus on human sharing efforts like this and like all the work that Debbie does, as well as automated, which I'm going to take a minute to talk about. We do this because there are strengths in numbers. Many perspectives and voices give a much richer possibility of finding solutions, whether we're as many of us are at this stage of the industry, talking to each other. We're the 300, the 3,000, whatever. We're the folks who know each other. We run into each other. We're subject matter expert rich. Or as this space continues to expand, there's larger groups of people who have less depth perhaps in our specific expertise, but bring nonetheless valuable perspectives. So we look to bring all those together. We focus on inbound knowledge. How do we get knowledge from the outside world, from entities like DHS, like the U.S. federal government, other public sector, private sector, and our membership itself? How do we take that information? How do we derive knowledge from it? And how do we share that knowledge with our members? And perhaps somewhat uniquely among similar centers, we look to multiply the impact of our outbound knowledge. The ICS-ISAC's focus is not strictly on end users and asset owners, though we have asset owners and we encourage asset owner membership. But a lot of our membership is the vendors, are the integrators, are the people that have contacts with large numbers asset owners, industry organizations, and others. So we look to share knowledge that then gets shared in large quantity with others. Our whole focus is on helping to build in our part the knowledge sharing networks that have been arising for the last number of years. These networks are founded on facilities having knowledge and being able to use knowledge that's shared with them. The networks are connected together by sharing structures that have been evolving for the last couple of years. And they're built and they ramify multiply the intelligence inside them on the experience of everyone involved. So it's those common concerns that are cross-sector, that are interdependent and international, that we as the ICS-ISAC focus on. So for my subtopic today, I wanted to give a little brief talk about SARA, the Situational Awareness Reference Architecture. It's a large part of the focus of activity in the ICS-ISAC, particularly in really this last month. This has been an underlying theme that goes back many years, 7, 8 years, by my own personal perspective. And as all of us in the industry know, in the last several years, through efforts, many of which driven by the U.S. public sector in the federal space, have been evolving. Currently this year we have the Presidential Executive Order, Presidential Policy Directive 21, PPD 21, and related tangential efforts driving information sharing in the federal sector. So what SARA is the compilation of best practices and tools and standards that we're putting together with cooperation with our membership. Which you'll see a lot more of this, and there's some articles and information written about this already. But it's a reference architecture for shared visibility that ties together all the component pieces. It's looking to take technical and process means and put them in deployable scenarios that asset owners and integrators can actually use, to have some opinions on this, and to make it compatible and extensible. We're specifically not creating new standards. We're looking to take existing standards efforts like STIX and TAXI, or tools like what Waterfall is doing or what other vendors are doing, and put them in context so that people can apply them, so that they can get the shared awareness that we need. And what do we mean by that? Well, if you as a facility know who you are, you know what you have and you know what it's doing, then you can use the knowledge that's shared with you, which is a problem anybody who is an asset owner or is working with asset owners knows is sort of glaring today. If you then have that knowledge, you can then share some of it with others. So SARA will look to capture ways to do this. In identity, for example, capturing standards of practice for asset owners and their partners to determine what capabilities they have. Who are they? I am a publicly owned municipal water system, and I make decisions by being told to do things by city council. Or I'm an investor-owned electric utility or a manufacturer or chemical. And with that knowledge of who they are, they can then make rational decisions on what to do. There is an existing open architecture published that'll be the first component of this in the open part of SARA. And of course, commercial service providers and vendors and others will be able to map their offerings to the SARA architecture as well. On inventory, looking at how do you maintain and create inventory, that being, what devices do I have? What are the control system components, the process equipment, how are they connected together, how are they configured? So the tools and techniques, open source tools and standard best practice as a foundation, and then again, commercial offerings commercial providers can map their offerings to that. Activity, what is your stuff doing? If I have a network, control system network, can I see what it's doing or can I not see what it's doing? Can I tell the difference between good and bad? There are industry practices and open source tools and methodologies for doing these sort of things, and a rich set of commercial products and services to help asset owners do that. And then sharing. How do I, as an asset owner, receive knowledge from the outside world? How do I apply it? How do I make decisions? And again, there are process and technology developed, particularly in recent years, that we'll look to capture. Outbound, how do I derive shareable knowledge from the information that I have without running into the normal punji sticks and tiger traps? How do I anonymize that and share that outward? And technically, how do I exchange that? What schemas and transports can I use so that vendors and integrators can make products and services that asset owners can consume and reliably and with control share information with the outside world? All of this to get to the point where we get the emergent properties of knowledge sharing. That's what we're all really working towards, where we can take some piece of knowledge, whether it comes from a vendor like Waterfall or a researcher or an asset owner or a public entity, and share that with a center in a knowledge network, who will then appropriately route and switch that knowledge to other centers who will then, in their own turn, share with asset owners, where those asset owners can then, in an automated fashion, based on their own previous decisions, choose how to use it. You know, that I will take this sort of knowledge and I will make a monitoring rule out of it so I'll know if it happens to me. Or perhaps it's the kind of knowledge that I would allow to my systems to use as active defenses. In any case, that asset owner then can derive from the knowledge they already have, assuming that, of course, they've gone through the process of having knowledge in the first place. And they can perhaps look at their forensics, look at their records and their logs and say, have I seen this before? If so, they can get all the data and all the information, all the gory details that they need to achieve their goals. And they can derive some partial knowledge from that can be shared. You know, such as, I'm a water facility in the United States. I saw this 6 months ago for the first time, and the last 6 days it's escalating. And they can then, in an automated fashion, share that knowledge back with the rest of us, so that we, again, you know, through our own networked decision-making abilities, ramify that knowledge back and forth, so that vendors can make better decisions on where to put their resources, where public sector entities who have diligence responsibilities to societies can decide how to defend their constituents, and where we can all achieve the goal of more reliable shared infrastructures. So all of this, when you get down to the end of the day, for people who work in the technical space, isn't really rocket science. In fact, that's kind of the point. You know, as Andrew and I were talking about just before this call, one of the defining characteristics of this period is that for those of us who are particularly expert in individual components, and feel that we've discussed these things over and over for the last 5 or 6 years, we're beginning to get to the stage where we're going to need to repeat them a lot more often, because the vast majority of people, you know, the millions of engineers that need to do this work, haven't heard any of it. So with Sarah, we're going to try to capture these simple, non-contentious, inarguable base realities of how do I, as a facility, capture inventory and activity and change at the very basic level. How do I share that? What schemas and transports and field values can we agree on to use in the outside world? And how do we, in generally, at least deal with the privacy and legalities and motivations to make sure that information flows? So that's a lot of what we're up to right now. And we're working with our membership, with organizations who have labs, with asset owners, building our own lab to build a demonstration in parallel with defining the architecture that we're working on. So that in this calendar year, between now and the end of the year, we'll have a functional draft document. We'll have a limited pilot with at least a few nodes who are in lab and hopefully in asset owner environments, detecting changes and bad things and good things, sharing that in an automated fashion with external parties. And in 2014, taking this to the next level and broadening the scope and broadening the pilot. And of course, working with our public and private sector partners on these sort of things, and welcome all the feedback we can possibly get on it. So with my entree out of the way, I'd like to turn it over to Andrew Ginter, the VP of Industrial Security at Waterfall, who's going to give a talk about unidirectional gateways, and I promise not to use the word term data diodes. So, Andrew, it's over to you.
Thank you. The slide deck, are you putting them up or am I putting it up?
I'll put them up for now. If anything happens, you can fall back to your own.
Okay. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. I'm Andrew Ginter with Waterfall Security. Waterfall is a technology vendor. We produce unidirectional security gateways. We're focused exclusively on protecting the safety and reliability of industrial control networks. My topic today, I'm going to say a few words about the technology for those of you who are new to it, I'm going to talk about defense in depth and where this technology fits in the defense in depth stack. The technology is a perimeter protection technology, so I'm going to be focused on perimeter protection aspects, layers of perimeter protection that you put in place when you're protecting safety critical and reliability critical systems. And I'm going to be talking to different industries and how, where really this technology is being deployed in different industries, because different industries have different needs, and they wind up deploying it, perhaps unsurprisingly, in different places. Chris, I don't actually see the slides up. Are you sure you're sharing?
Oh, I am now. So we may have missed all the early ones, and I apologize if that's the case. We'll check the recording and edit them in if necessary.
There we go. Okay. And you have my slide deck there. I see a Word document up.
All right. Sorry. Let me switch screens here real quick. 1 second. How are you now?
There we go. If you could move to the next slide, please. Okay, so here's the unidirectional gateway technology that we're talking about. I wanted to say a few words about the technology, and then I'm going to back up into context and defense in depth, and then dive back into the technology. But I hate leaving people in suspense. So here's what we're talking about. It's a perimeter protection technology. It fits into a network in the same place as you would normally consider deploying a firewall. But it gives you stronger protection. You know, what is a firewall? You look at it, usually it's a chunk of metal with a logo on it. You know, you pull out the screwdriver, you open it up, what's inside? It's a CPU. There's memory. There's EEPROM or flash. Firewalls are software artifacts. Unidirectional gateways are hardware artifacts. In the diagram here, the red section in the center, the highlighted section is all the gateway solution. It consists of some software and some hardware working together. The hardware has a transmit appliance and a receive appliance, and they're connected by a fiber optic cable. The transmit appliance has a laser in it. The receive appliance has a photocell. You can send from your industrial network out to your corporate network, but you can't send anything back because physically there is no laser in the receive appliance, and there is no receiver in the transmit appliance. The transmit appliance can't even tell if the receive appliance is powered on. There's physically no way for any signal to get back. The claim to fame for this technology, you know, ours and our competitors, we work in a space with, you know, a variety of people producing this technology. The claim to fame for this technology is absolute protection of safety and reliability from attacks originating on external networks, because, of course, no signal can get back. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, backing up a little bit, the question is, you know, why is this a problem at all? And the answer is that as long as nearly 20 years ago, the mid-1990s, a variety of industries figured out that they could profit from access to data in their real-time systems. There's a number of different applications that evolved. Maybe the simplest one is predictive maintenance. Instead of saying, my big equipment I'm going to maintain every 3 months, whether it needs it or not, if you have access to information about how much that equipment's been run, how hard you've run it, you might be able to delay maintenance by 2 weeks. And that results in significant cost savings. That one application alone is estimated to save large sites, depending on the site, between 3 and 7% of total operating costs. This is millions and millions of dollars every year. And so people figured out that this data has enormous value. They started moving it out from the industrial networks to the corporate networks where they could profit from it. And, of course, connected up those networks in the course of doing that. You know, a little later, people started thinking about, you know, security, maybe we should do something about that. And by and large, most people put in firewalls and encryption. And they said, hey, we got firewalls. We got encryption. So we're safe, right? Next slide, please. Well, how safe are we really? Firewalls have been around for nearly 25 years now. The good guys know how to break through them. The bad guys know how to break through them. This is a slide from a presentation I do sometimes, 13 ways to break through a firewall with live demonstration. And for the record, these are 13 kinds of ways through a firewall. Each of these kinds of ways has between several dozen and several thousand examples you can point to in the wild. In a sense, really, this is summarizing an attack tree, a very high-level summarization of an attack tree for firewalls, a pen tester's attack tree. The lesson here is twofold. There's a lot of ways through firewalls. Everybody knows how to do this. This is the reason why, if you look at the standards, ISA-SP99, you look at the DHS catalog of controls, you look at NERC-CIP, you look at all of these standards and guidance for industrial control system security. This is why all of these things talk page after page about what you have to do to manage your firewalls, to try and keep them somehow reasonably secure. The way to keep these vulnerable software artifacts anywhere near secure is to apply people and processes. You've got to review every change you make to the firewall in case you're inadvertently, fumble fingering it and turning your firewall into a router through misconfiguration. You've got to test every change to make sure that the firewall software interprets the configuration the same way you and your reviewers did. You've got to document it so you know what's going on 2 years down the road. You've got to audit the documentation periodically to have a second set of eyes to make sure that you haven't fumbled, and so on and so forth ad nauseum. You spend a lot of effort watching logs and looking at configurations. You spend a lot of effort. It's time and people, and eyes on glass is the way you keep these vulnerable software artifacts somewhere near secure. The second point to make here is, in order to profit from the industrial data, from the data in the real-time systems, really what you need is the data. You need access to the data. And so people have connected up their networks and put firewalls in place, thinking that the firewalls are protecting the industrial network, but still providing the corporate users with access to the industrial data. But if you think about it, that's not really what the firewalls do. Firewalls don't provide you with access to data. They provide you with access to industrial systems so that you can ask those systems for the data. This is not good, because if you ask the system for the data, you can send in buffer overflows, you can send in SQL injection, you can try and confuse the systems, you can attack the systems. Every time you think you're exposing data through a firewall, you are in fact exposing systems to attack. Next slide, please. I was going to blast through these fairly quickly here, just to give you a taste of, should you really believe me on this firewall thing. The single most popular way to break through firewalls is not even to break through the firewalls. It's to fake an email, a phishing attack, send it in to someone behind the firewall. This is done more often on business firewalls than on industrial firewalls, but for the record, phishing attack, and you trick someone on the inside into actively working to pull the attack through the firewall and run it on their machine. Next slide, please. The easiest way through a firewall is not any high technology way. It's shoulder surf while a firewall administrator enters the admin password, or shoulder surf while a VPN user enters the user password. This is not high tech at all. Something that simple is all that it takes to get through a firewall. Next slide, please. The way that the advanced persistent threats like to get through here, the Chinese intelligence agencies, they like to use the phishing attack to get a foothold on the corporate network, and then look around for passwords or password hashes, or sometimes they'll even, pretend that there's a problem, simulate a problem with the computer they've taken over by, manual remote control through the corporate firewall. Wait for the help desk with admin privileges, with domain admin privileges to come in, discover the problem, fix the problem remotely, because that is the philosophy of the central help desk. We can see all, we can touch all, we can fix all. Great, they come in with domain privileges. You grab the domain administrator's hash And what do you do with it? You log into the domain controller with it, and you set up your own accounts. On business systems, on industrial systems, a lot of industrial networks are linked into the corporate domain controller, so that if someone owns the company, you press the button once on the corporate domain controller, and all permission for that individual throughout the company is revoked. Now the corporate domain controller is a single point of failure for your industrial systems, for your whole company. Someone gets into that, they can create accounts anywhere they want. They can create accounts on your process historians and the other systems that are exposed through the industrial firewalls, because they all trust the domain controller. You don't need to break into anything anymore once you've got these passwords. You've got your own accounts. You log in through the front door. You don't have to find vulnerabilities that are unpatched. You don't have to guess passwords. You don't have to find open shares. You've got your own accounts. You're going into the front door. Fourth one is my last one here. This is in a sense, the best known way to break through firewalls. The point here is that in order to expose, as I said earlier, industrial data, you've got to expose the industrial systems to attack, and so you don't even bother attacking the firewall. You reach through the firewall to the exposed systems and attack the industrial systems. And this is the one where there's thousands of examples in the wild: buffer overflow, SQL injection, you name it. People can attack these systems. There's lots of different ways. Next slide, please. Oh, I think you're a slide behind. I'm one more past you there. We're on defense in-depth keeping score. There we go.
Okay.
So when I do that presentation, really I'm looking at firewall attack trees. Really, it's not a firewall attack tree. It's a perimeter defense attack tree, and the currently dominant perimeter defense is firewalls. And so we ask, how do firewalls fare? How do all of these, various compensating measures fare? And I evaluate each of them in the presentation. The bottom line is that a perfect score here would be 26. Nobody gets a perfect score. We're going to talk about unidirectional gateways. It's got a good score here, but nothing is perfect. It doesn't matter what security you put in place. There's attacks that will get through it. This is, of course, the fundamental premise of defense in depth: layers of security, different kinds of security to slow down attacks and increase the chance that you can detect them and address them before they get anywhere sensitive. So I'm going to say a few more words about the gateways and how they work, and then I'm going to come back to, in defense in depth architectures, where do the gateways fit? Next slide, please. Okay, we've seen this slide. You look at it, though, it begs the question, how can it possibly work? Are most modern communications not bidirectional? SQL queries are bidirectional. Historian queries are bidirectional. Web interfaces are all bidirectional. How can this possibly work? How can you share the data without exposing the systems? Next slide, please. So secure historian replication. This is how it works. In a sense, it's a little different for every application. This is perhaps the one-third case. One-third of the unidirectional technologies deployed to protect industrial networks throughout the world are replicating historians in order to expose data to the corporate network. How does that work? Well, as I said, all industrial unidirectional solutions, be it ours or our competitors, work in a sense the same way. It's a combination of hardware and software. So in the diagram here, we've talked about the hardware: the transmit appliance, the receive appliance, the laser, the photocell, the fiber in between them can only send it one way. But there's software involved as well. The software is just a standard Windows or Linux application installed on a conventional computer. And that computer is connected to the transmit appliance on the inside, and the receive computer is connected to the receive appliance on the outside. These appliances, they don't even have CPUs in them. They're gate array logic. All they can do is send the data out. The software, the intelligence, has to live somewhere, and so in this diagram, it's installed on a conventional host. What does the software do? Well, you've got a plant historian on the inside on the industrial network. You've got another historian, a replica on the outside network. And this data movement, as a rule, is like to like. If it's pi on the inside, it's pi on the outside. If it's eDNA on the inside or GEI historian on the inside, it's eDNA or GEI historian on the outside. The software on the inside, on the industrial network, connects to the real plant historian, and it connects as a conventional historian client. There's no secret sauce here. There's no reverse engineering. There's no emulating protocols. There's no reaching under the nose of the historian into the file system and tweaking its files. You go through the front door. You go through the vendor's programming libraries. You connect to the historian, and you ask it a simple question. You say, please give me all your data. Takes a while, but you get all the data. You ask it a second standard query saying, please give me all the new data as it arrives in the historian from the devices in a real-time stream. These are standard queries for these historians. The Waterfall agent, the unidirectional agent, be it ours or someone else's, takes that data, marshals it up, and sends it out over the one-way hardware using a custom protocol. Does not try to emulate the historian vendor's under-the-hood client protocol. We're using the vendor's libraries to gather data, and only data, from the historian. We send the data out, and on the outside, it receives the data and registers with the replica as an interface node. Pi calls it, or a data collector, eDNA calls it. Different vendors call these things, this function different names, but it's the function that gathers data from devices and drops it into the historian, that populates the historian with data. And so timestamps and data come across the one-way mechanism and get dropped into the replica as if the data had just been received from the devices. When the synchronization here is done, you've got a replica historian on the outside network, on the corporate network. Corporate users can connect to the replica. Half the time it's got the same IP address as the historian on the inside. The corporate users think they're reaching through a firewall to get to the real historian. The replica is a faithful replica of the original historian. The replica's got all the data back to the beginning of time. It has all the latest data, less than a second old. Like I said, the users on the outside think they're talking to the real thing. They see the data changing in real time. Everything's good. Until, of course, somebody hacks the replica. A virus gets on there. A hacker gets in there. What happens? The business is up in arms. The business can't make money anymore if they can't access this data. They take out their sticks and they start whacking IT people over the head. The IT people come in here. They take the machine, the replica, down to the bare metal. They put the operating system back on from original media. They restore from backup. They fix whatever hole let somebody into it in the first place. They press a few buttons on the inside to retransmit the 3 hours data that is now a gap in the replica historian. After 3 or 4 hours, everything is up again. The business calms down. They can make money again. The whole time this has been happening, the industrial network is oblivious to any kind of havoc that's happening on the corporate network because, of course, no signal can pass from the corporate network back to the industrial network. All sorts of stuff can go wrong out there, and operations just keeps working safely, reliably. Next slide, please. So a little more complicated example. I'm going to show you some, replications that people use in a couple of minutes. One of them is OPC. A lot of people look at that and they I'm anticipating a question here. They ask me the question, how can you possibly do OPC across a one-way medium? OPC is nasty. OPC is layered on top of DCOM, and DCOM is layered on top of DCE, and DCE is riding on, I don't know, UDP or something deep under the hood, and it's intensely bidirectional. How can you possibly do OPC over a one-way medium? You must be cheating. You must be sending a signal back somehow. The answer is no, we don't. We don't even try to do the OPC protocol over the one-way medium. It's not possible. But what you can do is you can write an OPC client on the industrial network and have it connect to the real OPC servers and gather data from those servers, OPC data, using the nasty OPC protocol. Now you send the data out to the receive agent. The receive agent is an OPC server. OPC is open protocol. Anyone can write an OPC server. And so there's an OPC server standing there that receives data from the unidirectional hardware and hangs on to it in the head of the server until a client, an OPC client on the corporate network, like a web server or a corporate historian, connects to the OPC server and asks it for the data. So what's happening here is the OPC protocol is not passing through the unidirectional appliances. All that's passing through there for the historian, all that's passing through there for OPC is the data. This is the technology. This is, in a sense, the right technology to deploy when you want to expose industrial data to the corporate network without exposing industrial systems, because all that passes across this unidirectional mechanism is data, no protocols, no systems. Next slide, please. So if what we're doing here is replicating servers so that they can hold on to the data and serve that data to the corporate network without contacting the industrial servers, it begs the question, what servers do you support? Because if we're going in through the front door, the vendors' libraries or the open OPC specifications, if you're going in through the front door for every server, you're going to need a different piece of software to pull data from every server. You can't use an Oracle client to pull data from Pi, or much less pull data from OPC. So it begs the question, what's out there? What kind of software, what kind of servers can be replicated? And the truth is that, different vendors have different sets of software. This is one of the ways the vendors distinguish themselves. This is Waterfall set. I will say that the single most popular deployment is replicating historians, and you see a bunch of the historians Waterfall supports on the upper left. The second most popular deployment is OPC-DA, and you see that on the upper right. And then there's everything else. Two other things to say about this. One is across the top here, these are the industrial replications. These are, in a sense, the headline acts. This is why you deploy unidirectional gateways to replicate industrial servers. The stuff across the bottom, that looks more IT-like. What's going on there? Why is IT stuff being replicated through here? The answer is that you deploy this technology because of the headline acts, because you need to move the industrial data. And inevitably, in the course of planning for the deployment, corporate IT sitting at the table and puts up their hands and says, okay, great, I get it. Absolute protection for safety and reliability from online threats. You just wipe out the online threat vector coming from corporate. I get that. That's a good thing. But you realize that you've broken corporate security policy number 13B, which is that all equipment corporate-wide is going to send SNMP traps to our network operations center. And so this is why, if you look at leading IT monitoring applications halfway down, in the middle of the line there is SNMP. We replicate out SNMP traps. Oh, you do that. Okay, and you've also broken corporate policy number 12A, which is all equipment corporate-wide is going to send security configuration information into our security operations center running, one of the popular SIMs. Oh, well, if you look on the bottom of leading IT monitoring applications, we support ArcSight, we support McAfee, different vendors support different SIMs. This is there because this IT stuff gets pulled along when you deploy the industrial stuff to keep everything working. Everything that used to work should really keep working after you swapped out the firewalls with the unidirectional solution. One last thing to say about this is, again, different vendors are different. For the record, Waterfall's policy is our mandate is to replicate everything. This is a lot of stuff, but it's not everything, not by a long shot. And so if you folks are looking at this saying, I really need X, or my client really needs X, and I don't see it on here, come and talk to us. The only question we have is, what do we build next to put on our price list so that anyone can order it? Our only business model is commercial off the shelf. But again, different vendors vary. That's Waterfall's policy. Next slide, please.
Andrew, Bill Evans had a hand raised earlier. Bill, do you have a question you want to toss to Mr. Ginter? I have you off mute now, so we should be able to hear you.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. Please do send the questions in, and Chris, I'm grateful that you're watching that. I get caught up in the presentation here, and don't always see if.
Well, we do have another from Satish. You have a question you'd like to ask?
Yeah, hi. When there is a historian server transmitting data unidirectionally, we need the time synchronization done on the other end, at the receiver end, perfectly. How does the transmitting end know the time has been synchronized properly or not? If you don't synchronize the time properly, then the data will not be accepted if the time is in future received from the transmitter.
Good question. There's a couple of answers there. I'll talk to the time question in a minute, but I'm going to speak to your question, how do you know, first? And the answer is the transmitter on the inside cannot know what's going on the outside. There's no way to know for sure. We can put all sorts of technology in place to make sure that the time is synchronized with a very high probability, 99% with as many nines behind it as you need. But fundamentally, the transmitter cannot know because it gets no signal back whatsoever from the outside world. But to speak to your question specifically about the time sync, if we go back one slide,
Yep.
You'll see NTP down there under other connectors on the right-hand side, about middle of the page. So we can, if there's a time master on the industrial network, we can send that synchronization out to the corporate network and synchronize whatever servers, replica servers out there need to be synchronized with what's on the inside. So we can send those signals out. There's a variety of techniques that are used to ensure with a very high degree of probability that those signals get out. But fundamentally, there's no way to know for certain. There's no way to get an acknowledgement back because, of course, no signal can come back. Any path that would let an acknowledgement come back would also let an attack come back. Did that answer your question?
So whatsoever, only manually somebody has to let us know that the other end time is not synchronized if there is any discrepancy in reception of the data.
If there's ever a problem with the data going out, time synchronization or a message lost or anything like that, the receive side, like if we could drop back to the OPC slide, please, the previous one. The receive side there, the receive agent, the receive software on the outside network is going to learn about that problem. It's either going to learn because the transmit side had a problem on the inside and told the receive about it, or it's going to learn about the problem because the receive side detected the problem, such as the time sync problem. And those error logs, those error messages saying, hey, there's a problem on the outside network are, of course, available to anybody who needs them. You can send them to your network operations center. You can send them to your SOC. You can send them to your email. You can send them, text messages to your pager. There's lots of different ways to distribute those messages and take corrective action. I will say that I'm going to diverge for a second. The question is, how can we have any kind of confidence at all, not absolute knowledge, but any kind of confidence that the data is going out? I'm going to say a few words about the data integrity mechanisms that the different vendors use to make sure that the stuff gets out, to the extent that it's possible over a unidirectional medium. There's about 8 layers of protection in place. The optical hardware should be high-quality hardware. It tends to run between 18 inches and 18 feet. The transmit and receive appliances tend to be either in the same rack or in adjacent racks, or sometimes in adjacent rooms, the ops room and the IT room. So you tend not to lose any bits of time sync or any other data for that matter. There may be an option to retransmit every message, let's say every 30 seconds. Cuts down the total bandwidth that's possible, but most sites have bandwidth to spare. So if you send every message twice, even if there was a problem on the first one, it'll get received on the second one, and everything will sync up properly. There's sequence numbers on every message, so you can tell on the outside if there's a problem. There's error correcting codes on every message, so that in the extremely rare case where you might lose a bit from the optical hardware, these are Hamming style codes. The hardware will fix the message on the way through. It won't just raise a flag and say, hey, there's a problem. A certain number of bit errors can just be fixed by these Hamming codes. Brain blank. 8 layers. There's a high availability option. That's one of the higher layers. I missed a couple of layers in between. If the business says this is a business critical need, I need this data to come out 24/7, no exceptions, 5 nines of reliability, tolerate any single point of failure, you can do that. There's
Okay.
Several of the vendors have you can cluster the transmit clients, you can cluster the receive software, you can put multiples of the gateways in between. Everything gets sent over the gateways, over all of the gateways, any single point of failure, the data keeps moving. And so, in practice, our customers tell us that by far the single most common cause, the 99% case of data loss, mechanisms in place, is taking down the receive agent host to install Windows updates. And so it's scheduled downtime. So they do one of two things. One of three things. They either schedule the downtime so that there is no data to lose because the plant is down anyway. And so in theory you've lost data, but in practice there was nothing worth saving there to begin with. Or they use a replication where, as part of the scheduled downtime, they can walk over to the other rack, log into the transmit side, and resend the 3 hours data or the 1 hour's data, whatever it took to get the Windows stuff installed. Or in rare cases, they'll put high availability in, but less than 5% of our customers go that far. Most of them look at the mechanisms we have in place, look at their experience of data loss or non-data loss and say, yeah, what we've got is good enough, and off they go. That's a very long answer to your question. I'm sorry.
Well, it's a good answer as well. I like the particularly at the end there you're talking about what people actually do, which is, as often as not, and more often than not, as important or more important than how things can be done. Because when we all build technologies and products and solutions and so forth, we put about the real world, it's how they actually get applied in context. It gets very interesting. And so our own Joel Langle had put a comment out there that I'll read. But Joel, I've got you off mute as well if you want to pipe up. And Satish, I've had to put you back on mute because of background noise. So raise a hand if you want to say more. But Joel had said, heard the question as, how is time transferred? My answer, the database sends timestamp data across the appliance, so time is not created on the receive end. The database is an exact duplicate. And I think, as you were saying, Andrew, my thoughts as well were that it gets to higher levels. So if I know that I can't push time upstream, what I'll do on the receiving end is double check. I'll look at inbound data. If the time is wrong, then I know something as a human being. And I can go back and say, do whatever is necessary. As you say, there's lots of layers and lots of ways to do this. But on the corporate network, if the OT, the operational network, is sending me data and the time is wrong, then I should be able to detect that on the enterprise network.
That's right. And really, in practice, I think maybe a simpler answer to the question is this. You might use our synchronization technology to push the time sync through the gateway. More commonly, what people have is they've got a GPS time sync on the inside. They've got an NTP master on their inside network, and they use that to synchronize their industrial stuff. And they've got an NTP master on the outside. And really, these two masters keep the time on all this equipment synchronized plus or minus, a handful of milliseconds or a handful of tens of milliseconds. And realistically, pulling the data, from the devices through the historian out into the replica historian takes time. The latency is typically about a second or a little less than a second. So we're talking, many hundreds of milliseconds. And so by the time the data gets out to the replica, even if the replica is not synchronized exactly with the original, the data is, 500, 600, 700 milliseconds old by then, and the replica has no trouble accepting it. That's maybe the simpler answer.
Now, I wanted to I think we're getting bogged down on the time problem. It's important to understand, if we take OSI soft Pi as the example, time is applied at the Pi collector. So what's transferring across the appliance is timestamp data. Those systems don't need to be synced because time is going through the appliance as part of the data. It's not collecting data through the appliance, which would require timestamping to occur on the other end. But the timestamp's already been added to the data, and that's going through. So what's on the other side is an exact duplicate of the Pi database. That's kind of where I was hoping we would go with the answers.
That is true, Joel, and I can't speak to Pi. I know I'm more familiar with other historians. I know that some of these other historians that I'm familiar with, if you send a timestamp piece of data in, and the timestamp is, let's say, 7 seconds into the future, even though the data is timestamped, the historian will reject that data and say, that's an invalid timestamp. There's no such thing as data in the future. And I don't know what Pi does. So you need to be synchronized reasonably closely so that your timestamps that are coming in are not in the future.
Neat.
Okay, let's jump forward to how this technology is being used and where it's being used in different sectors. So we've got the bulk electric system up, NERC, North American Electric Reliability Corporation, Critical Infrastructure Protection Standards. For those of you not familiar with the power grid in that degree of detail, the standards apply to what's called the bulk electric system. This is, in a sense, the backbone of the grid. The biggest generators, the mesh-type transmission grid that we have, the interconnected regions, the control centers that control the big iron power. If you have a little 50-megawatt generator somewhere, producing power off of waste heat from an industrial process, as a rule, NERC isn't interested. That's not part of this the bulk electric system. If you've got a 2-gigawatt generator somewhere, as a rule, NERC is interested, and it's covered by the SIP standard. The NERC SIP version 5 has just been submitted to FERC, the Federal Energy Reliability Commission, or something like that, that answers to Congress for approval. And so the standard is before FERC for approval right now. It's expected that FERC is going to tweak the standard very slightly, but leave it largely intact as part of the approvals process. What that means is that the existing, let's put it this way, the existing standard, I'm not going to dive into the details, if you use hardware-enforced unidirectional communications to protect your critical systems, the standard gives you a break on 37 out of the 103 requirements. So it gives you a break on roughly 1/3 of the requirements, cuts your compliance obligation from 103 requirements down to 60 odd, buys you 1/3 off. This is great. The word you want to look for in the standard, if you're looking for this, is the word bidirectional. It's one word in the standard that does this. So in a sense, it's subtle. I talked to the drafting team, members of the drafting team. I said, this looks great for our heroes in terms of encouraging the use of strong security in the form of unidirectional communications. But it's subtle. Is this really what you meant? Did you mean to do this? And their answer was, yes, of course we meant to do this. We love this technology. We were not willing to require that everyone use it, not at this point, maybe in the future. But right now, we're absolutely going to give you a break on your compliance obligations and costs if you use this technology. And I'm going, great, great. Could you have made it just a little less subtle? One word is all that's in there. the word bidirectional in one of the definitions that triggers these 37 exemptions. And they said, look, one word is unambiguous. There's 2 paragraphs in there about whitelisting. You know, who knows how that's going to be interpreted? And I'm going, okay, I'll take it. So NERC is on record as encouraging entities to look at this technology because it's such strong security. In SIP version 3 and 4 that were really written before the technology came into widespread use, the standard really doesn't address the technology directly, but does address it in, you know, the technology. A lot of it is using non-routable protocols between the senders and the receivers across the security perimeter and triggers another bunch of exemptions. So the point here is that people can deploy this technology because it's strong security, and they can deploy it because it reduces compliance obligations. And people are doing both in the bulk electric systems. It's deployed most commonly right now in generating plants. There are applications in substations and in control centers, but they're much smaller number-wise than generating. Generating is the sweet spot for this technology in the power grid right now. And it's deployed most commonly in your defense and depth architecture. Again, we're talking layers of perimeter protection. It's deployed most commonly at the boundary between the plant-wide network, not the individual DCS systems that are controlling the units, but the plant-wide network, typically where the historians and the maintenance systems work, the boundary between the plant-wide network and the corporate network. That's the sweet spot for it. Remote turbine management is an issue because a lot of these sites have the vendor reach in remotely and monitor continuously the vibration parameters on these turbines, because if there's a vibration problem on the turbine and it isn't addressed promptly, the vibration gets worse and worse and you wind up with a catastrophic failure 3 months later. You know, the turbine shakes itself to pieces. So the turbine vendors have to be able to monitor continuously, and of course, that's easy to do with this technology. You just replicate the data out, and they have access to the replica data, and they can monitor their heart's content. But occasionally, they've got to reach in and tweak things. At SIP sites, the way they do that is with remote screen view, which I'm not going to go into detail here, but it's if you need a third party like a vendor occasionally to come in and adjust something, what they do is they can see the screens on the inside network as you on the inside move the mouse. You get advice over the phone, you tweak the vibration parameter, you hang up the phone, and you're good for another 6 months. At non-SIP sites, where this technology has been deployed for security rather than for compliance, that turbine management function can be done with something called a secure manual uplink, which is a temporary two-way connection. It's left turned off, physically turned off 99% of the time. 1% of the time when the vendor has to reach in through VPNs and whatever, you turn it on, and it will automatically turn itself back off after 30, 60 minutes, whatever's pre-programmed. So that's the bulk electric system. Next slide, please. And the truth is that the single biggest installed base in the world for this technology, protecting industrial systems, is power generation. But we're seeing a lot of interest from a number of other industries, and I'm speaking to this one here: oil and gas, chemicals. There's upstream, there's downstream. Upstream is production, downstream is the refining end. Big refineries and chemical plants have a lot in common. The compliance imperative here really is not very compelling. CFATS, the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standard, is seen as not having a lot of teeth on the cybersecurity side. There's one sentence in the standard that says you've got to prevent cyber sabotage. There's a whole document of guidance that DHS put out in, I think, 2009 for CFATS, trying to expand, because they're auditing against this. And it's got, I think, 7, 8, 10 pages on cybersecurity. And so, the advice there is, in a sense, very nebulous. So people aren't seeing a CFATS imperative to deploy this technology. They're deploying it because they want security. In the upstream, in the primary production of oil and gas fields, it's being positioned in the same place as in the power sector, between the plant-wide, or the edge of the operations network and the beginning of the corporate network, that interface. In refining and chemicals, we're seeing two modes of deployment. One is, again, like power sector, at the boundary between the plant and corporate. The problem in chemical is that these plants, the refineries, the chemical plants, they can be massive, physically massive. I was working with one plant a few years ago where, I asked our guy on site, hey, what control system does the plant use? And there was a pause, and he's going, that's the wrong question. That question doesn't make any sense. I'm going, why? Talk to me. What do I got wrong here? He says, it takes 5 minutes to get into a car and drive across this plant. It's so big. There's 27 different control rooms, each of which is using a different control system. It's massive. And so with these massive installations, with huge numbers of systems, the plant-wide network is often being managed by the security people as if it were an IT network. And it's not until you get deeper into the architecture, the DCSs, or even the safety systems, that you start seeing the engineering change control discipline being applied to these systems, because they're getting closer and closer to the safety critical and reliability critical functions. So some chemical folks are deploying this at the edge of operations. Some of the chemical folks, they centralized all of their support functions in a head office. And they've got not just an operations network at each site. They've got an operations wide area network, an ops WAN in the diagram here, the green stuff. And they've also got a corporate WAN, of course. And they've got everything, firewalls everywhere. And the people who are the engineers who are physically managing these sites remotely, they got 2 computers on their desk, one connected to the ops WAN and one connected to the corporate WAN. So these sites are looking at one of 2 things. They're either putting the gateways between their operations WAN and their corporate WAN, or they're saying, that doesn't make sense. There's too much going on there. And what they're doing is they're deploying this technology first at the very lowest layer so that they can monitor their safety instrumented systems without any risk to those systems. They're doing a bottoms-up approach instead of a top-down approach. So chemicals is, in a sense, all over the place because their systems are so very complicated. Next slide, please. Or do we have more questions?
We're good for now. We had a comment from Frank, who had to drop at the top of the hour, just about the time issue. We can readdress that at the end when we're done with the slides.
Okay, good. We're also seeing a lot of interest in this technology from water and wastewater processing. Where we're seeing the interest is not so much from the big consolidated companies that have 100, 150 water and wastewater sites all over the continent. Where we're seeing the interest is in municipal water and wastewater. Why is that? Well, it's partly because of security. The municipal water and wastewater, the folks I talk to are pretty much unanimous, saying, I'm either air-gapped right now or as nearly air-gapped as I can manage. And I don't want anyone coming into my network or anything coming into my network. I've got public safety issues here. I've got, sometimes there's fluoride going into the water, which, in high concentrations is extremely toxic. There's chlorine going in the water, which again is toxic. The water has got to have enough chlorine in it or it's not fit for human consumption, et cetera, et cetera. So these municipal water utilities are deploying the gateways. What you see on the bottom there is a typical before situation where these, they've benefited some from moving data around and gaining access to data, but they're deeply concerned about the security, and they're ripping out that firewall and putting a gateway. The firewall, again, is at the boundary between the plant network, the control network, and the corporate network. The big consolidated companies are in a pickle because they have started to centralize their engineering. They may not have engineers at the 150 sites anymore. They may all be at head office, just like chemical and refining. The problem is that chemical and refining got started with a security initiative in the mid-1990s. They've had nearly 15, 20 years to work out their ops WAN and their corporate WAN and put layers of firewall in, and they've got a sophisticated infrastructure they've built up. These water sites tend to have been doing this only for about half a decade or maybe a little bit longer than that. They're not nearly as mature. They have sites all over the country connected directly into the corporate network. They don't have the concept of an ops network. They have to reach into the sites remotely, and they can't use the concept of the ops WAN to insert, the strong protection. So they're struggling here to rationalize their network infrastructure to the point where they can use strong protections. Whereas the municipals, which have, the munis that have one big control system in one geography, and that's all they care about, they're deploying this stuff pretty easily. Next slide, please. So my last example here is the nuclear industry. It again, I said, the sweet spot for this technology is power generation. It's not just conventional generation, it's also nuclear generation. The regulations, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NRC 5.71 and the NEI 0809, were both updated, within the last half decade, and they were updated specifically to take into account unidirectional communications. Both of these standards give nuclear generators two choices. You can either deploy unidirectional communications at certain layers of your architecture and have about a half dozen requirements for your security, for your perimeter security on top of that, the unidirectional deployment. Or you can use firewalls and have, I don't know, it's like 27 or 32 requirements, a whole lot of requirements to try and keep your network secure. So you've got a choice in the standard. There's a serious benefit to using unidirectional communications, be it ours or someone else's. And in America, in the United States, the nuclear generators, ever since 3 Mile Island, have been under the gun. Ever since 3 Mile Island, they sit down and they make decisions about safety and security as a group. And they looked at these standards and they said, we have a choice here. We're all going to choose unidirectional. Nodding of heads around the room, yes, we're all going to do unidirectional. Nobody's going to do firewalls from the top to the bottom of their architecture. We're not leaving a path of attack from the internet into our nuclear generators, thank you. And so even though they had a choice, every one of the American nuclear generators has deployed unidirectional communications technologies. A majority of them use Waterfall, and the rest of them use other vendors.
Well, and that's perhaps that's perhaps a good segue into a question from Brian.
Sure.
So, Brian, I've got you off mute. You want to ask your question yourself, or if not, I will read for you. So sorry, is that you, Brian? Okay. So Brian was asking if there's a requirement for remote access, for engineering access and vendor support and so forth. How is that allowed for the unidirectional gateway? You touched on that a little bit with turbines earlier, but nukes is a great topic for that. So obviously, they're very complex systems that require a lot of support, and as you say, they're extremely security conscious.
Yep. With the nuclear generators, the question of remote access never arises. There's not one nuclear generator in the country who's asked that question. They're absolutely not interested. With other industries, it varies. Sometimes my answer to the question is, that's the wrong question. How many guys with guns have you got standing around your control rooms? Some. How many guys with guns do you have standing around your basement? None. Why does it make sense to control the power grid from your basement then? No, it really doesn't. But sometimes there really is a compelling reason. So for example, in the turbine management, a lot of the turbine vendors will not give you a warranty on the turbine unless they can manage it. What do the nuclear generators do? They say, thank you, we'll live without the warranty. The risk is... Other generators will say, okay, and like I said, there's two technologies that I used routinely. Remote BeamView is vaguely like remote desktop. Software on the protected network takes pictures of the physical screen on a handful of computers, usually engineering workstations, sends the pictures out, stands them up on a web server on the corporate network. You know, the remote vendors, let's say you've got a problem on your control system and you need to call Microsoft support, and you get somebody on another continent answering the phone. Do you trust this person? Are you going to let them in and let them, you know, remote control and fix what's broken on your control network? Not a chance. But you will let them look at the screen on the outside network while you sit on the inside, take advice over the phone, you know, bring up the communications diagnostics menu. No, that's system diagnostics, too lower. There you go, communications diagnostics. You'll take advice, and, you know, you'll move the mouse for them as long as you think the advice makes sense. So, you know, the remote screen view is used routinely for, in a sense, untrusted third parties who you need to ask for advice from time to time. In SIP sites, the turbine management people, when they need to give you advice to fix the problem, or, you know, if you've got a problem with your control system, you've got to get the control system vendor's help desk on the phone to help work through a problem. Secure manual uplink is a different technology. It's a piece of hardware. It's copper in, it's copper out. Most of the time the copper's electrically disconnected. No signal can pass through it. There's also a physical key on the box. You turn the key, and there's a relay on the inside that connects the copper. Now you've got a two-way connection. Generally, the two-way connection leads into an operations firewall. And so you can reach, you know, VPNs and usual security through the operations firewall into the operations network. This is used more commonly when you have a remote engineering team that needs occasional access to tweak things on your network. And this remote team is trusted. They've been through the background checks. They're, you know, they're in a sense, they're part of your family. You know, the corporate family. They're responsible for the correct operation, and so of course you let them in. But you don't go fumbling with cables. You turn the key, and the hardware, 30, 60, 90 minutes later, whatever you pre-programmed, the key pops back and you're disconnected. You use this for occasional remote control. If you go back to the chemical industry, that's the diagram where if you need control, that's how you do it. You do two networks, and the people who need access to the corporate network to get out on the internet because they need email, and they need access to the engineering network, they have to have two physical workstations on their desk. And you can connect up the corporate network to the operations network safely with the gateways to push data out. If you've got more exotic needs, for instance, in chemicals, sometimes you've got to send control recipes in, you know, daily or a couple of times a day. You know, in bulk electric system control centers, you need to send ICCP information both in and out. What some people will do is they'll use gateways in and gateways out. So now you've got two sets of gateways, one pointing in, one pointing out. And you've got to take some care to make sure that you don't do something stupid. Like, you know, put the gateways in, connecting one file server to the other, put the gateways out, connecting the same two file servers going, you know, the outward direction. And now, you know, an adversary is coming in. You know, it still has some work to do to get a remote control, a classic remote control, advanced persistent threat connection set up. But it's much easier than it would have been with just the one direction, a gateway. And for other needs, it gets more complicated. So if you've got specific needs, you know, give us a call and we can talk to you.
Well, and this is, you and I have had these conversations before, and, you know, this is, I think, exactly the point. And it's, you know, there was a Stuxnet question as well, and we're, so for the record, we're 13 minutes after the hour, so we're going to sort of punch through the next slides. Any other questions?
Yeah.
But it's
really the Q&A here.
Sure, but so this is exactly, and this is a good discussion point, because I think this is what it all comes down to. When I talk about, you know, air gaps, unidirectional gateways, and so forth, you know, the Stuxnet question is inevitable. You know, so it comes up pretty well every conversation that came up just now. You know, how does it address that? You know, and you've, I think, spoken very well to it in the last couple of minutes. You know, the answer is that a unidirectional gateway, data diode. You know, remember I was in it was you or Lior, I think it was Lior giving a talk at the JWG last year when it struck me what exactly this was, and I had a bit of an epiphany moment. It's like, look, this is physics. You know, data goes out, always. Does that mean someone doesn't occasionally come in with a USB or a DVD or do software upgrades or occasionally connect on the inside? No. But what it means is that the rest of the time, data only goes out, period. And it's incontrovertible. You know, there's a laser on one side, CCD on the other. It doesn't go the other way. And for all of the times you're not doing something else, you know exactly where you stand. Now, as this last bit of discussion has pointed out, what do you do the rest of the time? Well, that depends. Now you think. You know, what you've done is bought yourself some space. You're not sitting there 7/24 with a firewall configured the best you possibly can, wondering and waking up in a sweat in the middle of the night, oh, wait, maybe I screwed up. You know for a fact that at this moment, data only goes out. And then you think about the exception cases. Okay, so I have to have turbine generator, you know, turbine maintenance people have access from time to time. Okay, so I'll put a, you know, an egg timer on an inbound VPN gateway and have it physically disconnect itself and catch on fire, you know, at the end of it. So I know that, you know, I know it's open when it's open. I'll do VPNs on that. I'll have two-factor authentication. I'll do everything to raise that risk. To
yeah, and if I may, the value proposition there is, if you've got the gateway sending data out, you know, exclusively 99% of the time, the comparison is this: with the gateways out and nothing in 99% of the time, 99% of the time you're 100% secure from online threats. And the 1% of the time that you've opened up the SMU into an operations firewall, you're as secure as an operations firewall can make you. So would you rather be 100% secure 99% of the time, or would you rather be 99% secure 100% of the time?
Yeah. Well, exactly. Well put. And this is the kind of applied lessons that I think, you know, we as the SMEs that other people look to, you know, need to come back with, you know, because, you know, it's not saying anything that I haven't said before, that many of us haven't said before, that we have a flaw. Our flaw is that we're enthusiastic about this stuff, and we can get, you know, dogmatic, that here's the best way to do this, and, you know, academically this is the best way to do things. But in reality, there's people out there running gas turbines, you know, running turbines in flight. You know, it's a bit of a Slate Griffin has socialized the fact that engineers on the ground are managing jet turbines in flight on airlines, and it's true, and it's probably a good thing in general. But it ends up being, because usually when these things are happening, it's because the cost benefits or regulation or other safety benefits or whatever they are compelling. Our job as the cybersecurity people is to say, okay, you know, given they're going to do that, let's get pragmatic and limit. Let's find solutions that allow us to say things like you said. 99% of the time, you're 100% secure, and then we'll worry about the rest.
And if I may, the experience of you know, us selling into these markets is this: a minority, less than half, you know, it might be less than a quarter, I don't have the numbers in front of me, of our customers deploy SMUs or remote screen view. The majority of them look hard at their systems and say, you know, I can do without that because I care about security, because my compliance costs are so high, whatever the equation is. And they just do without it. And, you know, one quarter use this technology, or they do something else. Sometimes they get creative. So, you know, for example, we have one site where ICCP commands from the bulk electric system are coming in, and they need to reach the generator at some point, somehow. So what they do is they drop it into an RTU on the corporate network. They send 4 to 20 milliamp current loops across the physical boundary. They put a current loop data logger on the inside network, and they connect that up to the control system. And that looks at, you know, the handful of set points coming through on that, applies some serious sanity checks to them, you know, asks the operator, does this really make sense? Do you really want to increase production by 300 megawatts in the next 10 minutes? No, reject that. But, you know, people get creative for the residual that has to go through once they're convinced that they really do want the security.
Well, and it's that issue of compensating controls, right? You know, which gets a bad name because of, you know, compliance and so forth. But nonetheless, this is the reality of how engineers build systems. You know, an example that I always loved was the, you know, steam engines of the 1880s had bimetallic bearings on their main drive wheels, so the engineers could smell them when they overheated. Because, you know, you can't make it perfect. So what you do is you put a compensating control in so that you, nonetheless you can drive the train safely. And we get into this where you're exactly right. The air gap. We've got to get away from the whole idea of air gaps. Those don't exist. However, we can effectively air gap 99% of the time, perhaps, maybe 100%, maybe. Even then, there are compensating controls we want to put in place. Human processes. My favorite, topic, monitoring and awareness. So if I'm even in a nuke, I'm completely air gapped. It's only unidirectional, never anything else. I can still, sneaker net problems in there. But if I'm watching what's going on at an automated level, at a human level, again, I can reduce that risk to, no worse than gamma radiation or other problems that I have anyways. And that's our responsibility as the experts, not to be right and smug when things are melting down, but to be knowledgeable and able to work with the people who are knowledgeable about the other things that we don't know about, so that we can together make systems that are actually safe and reliable. So we're at 10 minutes left. So I'm going to, again, only partially fill in Debbie's role and just read her little 10-minute bit. And then if we want to run through the rest of your slides, any last questions, we can do that. But if she was here, she would be saying better than I that, ladies and gentlemen, we have just a few minutes left in this session. We want to make sure that we respect people's time. So Chris and Andrew, please wrap up your comments, and I will provide a closing statement when you are finished. So, Andrew, it's yours again.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of questions here. There's a question on example case in transmission and distribution. I can get that back to you. A lot of our customers won't let us use their names in public, but I can get you some data. And the truth is, there's less of that happening than in power generation. Transmission and distribution is still, in a sense, an emerging market. We're working with industry leaders. We're working with the companies who have approached us and said, I want to use your stuff. And we said, there's issues because your substations are unstaffed, and you need to send commands occasionally to open breakers. Yeah, we know that. Work with us. Make it happen. So those are the companies we're working with. Everybody else in the space wants to see 3 or 4 successful installations before they're going to be talking to us. So we're not talking to everybody in the space. We're talking to a couple of the leaders, and it's all under NDA at this point. But I can give you some information. Trends and standards and guidance. This is just a quick summary of how unidirectional stuff is showing up in various standards and regulations and guidance. The green stuff is stuff that even if it's called a standard, it effectively has the force of regulation. Even the NEI 0809 is phrased as guidance, but if a nuclear site picks it as the foundation for its security policy, the auditors say, fine, we're going to audit you against this, and it effectively becomes regulation. The gray area is emerging. It's stuff that is, under ballot that is not quite here yet, but it's coming. And the red dotted lines are the documents that mention this technology. There's a handful of them out already. There's a bunch of them under development. How do I know this? It's because I'm sitting on these committees and I'm, contributing to these documents. The argument I make quite successfully is that anytime you mention a firewall, you really ought to mention unidirectional gateways as a stronger alternative. And by and large, the standards bodies are going, yeah, that makes sense. And so this is all coming. Next slide, please. A few words about Waterfall, if you'll indulge us. We're headquartered in Israel. We've got an office in the United States. We're deployed at hundreds of sites. We're not deployed at hundreds of thousands of sites. This is not like firewalls that have been around for 25 years, but we are deployed at hundreds of sites in all critical infrastructures, though by the biggest single installed base is North American power generation. The industry analysts are all saying good stuff about us. They're effectively saying, this is a technology whose time has come. They're advising their clients to become familiar with the technology, to have the card in their pocket, so that when they deploy perimeter protection, they don't just reflexively pull out the firewall. They ask the question, should I play the firewall card here, or should I play the gateway card? The gateways tend to be deployed at one layer of your defense in depth architecture. You don't replace all of your firewalls with gateways. You replace one layer, and it tends to be either the plant layer, plant to corporate layer, or sometimes the safety intermittent system to the control system layer. So the highest layer or the lowest layer tends to be where it's deployed, but there are exceptions. We have partnerships with a lot of different industrial vendors. What the vendors give us, they take our equipment into their lab, they put it through its paces, and they give us one word, and the word is supported. Not they're going to take our support calls. What it means is they will continue to honor their support agreements with sites if they connect our equipment to theirs. And that's important for these sites where they have so much of a particular vendor's equipment. They need to stay in compliance with their support agreements. Last slide, please. And this really just sums it up. There's 3 reasons people deploy this technology. They deploy it for security. We talked a lot about that. They deploy it for compliance, especially in NERC, SIP, and in the nuclear arena. And they deploy it to reduce costs. The technology, as a rule, costs more to buy than a firewall does. But firewall costs are dominated by operating costs. All of these document and assess and review and pen test, all of those costs add up. Not to mention that a lot of these firewalls you got to pay for signature support, and those signature support costs are 70, 80% as big as the firewall cost. You're buying in essence another firewall every year and a couple of months. So you can vastly reduce these operating costs because the hardware saves you with the gateways. It doesn't matter how you configure or misconfigure the software. There's nothing you can do to the configuration. There's nothing an enemy can do to the configuration that will change the behavior of the hardware. That's why people deploy this. I would encourage you all to visit our website, download some of the good stuff we got there, become familiar with it so that you can then spread the word, give advice to your organizations and your clients as to this technology might fit in their architectures.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. And since we have come right to the end of our period, we'll close our questions. Any remaining questions anybody wants to fire, we will capture and get answered for you. On behalf of the ICS-ISAC and our membership, I want to thank all of you for being here today. We have these public briefings every 3rd Wednesday of the month. We have other briefings, solution briefings, and so forth. Next month, we'll have Gary Sturtevant, who is the former emergency management chair for the American Waterworks Association, talking about water. And every month, we'll have a panel or other conversations. We welcome you all to come. You can see these on our events page on our website, and Debbie communicates these out through Twitter and LinkedIn and various other forums. And if she was here, she would say, on behalf of all of us at the ICS-ISAC, we appreciate your joining us today. We hope you found the information of value and something that you can take and implement to further secure your industrial control systems. Our next member briefing will be held Wednesday, July 17th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and feature Gary Sturtevant, who will be providing insight into cybersecurity for water and wastewater. Other sessions will be announced in our monthly updates on the center's website and in our other communications vehicles. So thank you again for your participation on today's call, and have an awesome rest of your day. Thank you, folks. And with that,
thank you, everyone.
Thank you again, Andrew. We will talk soon, and with that, we will end the session. Thank you all very much. Have a good day.